Imagine stepping into a time machine right now.
Okay.
You travel back to like the 1950s,
Yeah.
and you pull up a list of the S&P 500. So the absolute titans
Yeah.
of the global economy.
Right, the big guys.
Yeah, exactly. And back then, if a company managed to fight its way onto that list, it could essentially just kind of kick back and relax
Mm-hmm.
because its median lifespan on that index was about 60 years.
Wow, 60 years.
Yeah. I mean, as an employee, you could get hired right out of school, work your entire professional life under one single corporate roof and, retire with a gold watch. It was just a completely different era of stability.
It really was. I mean, it was an environment where predictability was actually a given. You could plan in decades.
Right. But if you step back into that time machine and fast forward to 2024, the landscape it's just almost unrecognizable.
Oh, entirely.
Because that median lifespan of an S&P 500 company, it has plummeted to less than 20 years.
Less than 20.
Less than 20 years.
Yeah.
Which is just a staggering metric. I mean, we were watching these massive, heavily resourced, seemingly invincible institutions just become entirely obsolete in less than a single generation.
Yeah, and it sets the stage perfectly for the reality of modern business. We're dealing with these cascading technological disruptions. I mean, obviously AI is the big one right now.
Oh, for sure.
But also extreme climate volatility and supply chain fragility and these massive geopolitical shifts. So the old model of a CEO retreating to a mountaintop and setting a rigid 10-year strategic plan, and then just having the company blindly execute it.
Like the old days, yeah.
Right. That is a guaranteed recipe for extinction today. The planning horizons have just been completely compressed from decades down to, in some cases, literally quarters.
Which brings us to the core of today's deep dive. We're unpacking a piece of really fascinating research by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover, and it's titled Unlocking Organizational Agility.
Yes, a great paper.
And what I love about this paper is that it's not just a diagnosis of the problem. It is a very granular breakdown of the actual hidden machinery behind the companies that are surviving this chaos. So whether you're leading a division of a Fortune 500 company, or you're just trying to figure out why your own workplace seems to be in this state of like constant dizzying reorganization, this research maps out the exact survival mechanisms of the modern economy.
And the central survival mechanism, I mean, the antidote to that shrinking corporate lifespan that Dr. Westover focuses on is this concept called strategic flexibility.
Okay, let's unpack this, because on the surface, I hear strategic flexibility, and it sounds dangerously close to a corporate buzzword.
Right, it does.
Sounds like something slapped on a PowerPoint slide right before a round of layoffs.
Totally.
We hear a lot about being agile. So how is this different?
Well, what's fascinating here is the critical distinction the research makes between what we typically call operational agility and true strategic flexibility. Because they are not the same animal at all, operational agility is essentially about process optimization.
Like just doing things better.
Exactly. It's doing what you already do, just faster or cheaper or with fewer errors. It's leaning out your supply chain or adopting a new software tool to speed up email responses.
So it's kind of like running the exact same race, but just wearing lighter shoes.
Precisely. Yeah, that's exactly it. Strategic flexibility, on the other hand, it's the capacity of an organization to proactively or even reactively reconfigure its entire business model, its market positioning, and its massive resource allocation just on the fly.
Wow.
It's realizing that the race has fundamentally changed. So to use your analogy, it's noticing that you're no longer running on a track, you're suddenly swimming in a river.
Right.
And you need to stop sprinting and start building a boat.
Okay, so if a massive disruption hits, let's say generative AI just completely upends the core service your company provides, operational agility means you try to use AI to deliver your increasingly obsolete service 10% faster.
Exactly.
But strategic flexibility means you have the self-awareness and the structural capacity to just kill your darling product, pivot your massive workforce, and start selling an entirely new service based on that AI.
Exactly. But you hit on the million-dollar question right there, which is structural capacity.
Yeah.
Because flexibility it's easy to conceptualize for an individual startup founder in a garage, right?
Well, sure, they can pivot in a day.
Right. But how does a legacy corporation with, 50,000 employees and international supply chains and entrenched stakeholders actually bend without completely shattering?
Right, because large organizations are designed for efficiency and scale.
Yeah.
They aren't designed for spontaneous pivoting.
No, not at all. And a lot of the foundational research in this area, particularly studies looking at how firms navigate severe environmental turbulence, It breaks this capacity down into 3 concrete pillars.
Okay.
So to achieve strategic flexibility, a massive company needs resource flexibility, coordination flexibility, and cognitive flexibility.
Okay, let's walk through those. Because resource flexibility, that kind of makes intuitive sense to me. You need assets, both tangible and intangible, that aren't inextricably locked into one single use case.
Yes. So if you own a massive factory that can absolutely only produce one specific type of combustion engine component, and the market shifts overnight to electric vehicles,
Yeah, dead in the water.
you don't have resource flexibility, you have a stranded asset. So flexible firms invest in modular technology, adaptable real estate, and most importantly, highly adaptable human capital.
Okay, and the second pillar, coordination flexibility.
Yeah.
That sounds more structural. So it's not about the assets you have, but how you govern them.
Exactly. It's the capability to rapidly redesign your organizational routines, your decision-making structures, and your resource allocation pipelines.
I see.
Because if an amazing new opportunity arises, but it takes, 18 months, 4 steering committees, and a board vote to reallocate budget to it, your coordination flexibility is essentially zero.
Okay, I think of this like a massive sports team or maybe a logistics hub. So resource flexibility is having a fleet of trucks that can carry different types of cargo.
Mm-hmm.
And coordination flexibility is having a dispatch system that can reroute all those trucks in real time if a major highway suddenly collapses without having to ask the CEO for permission every single time.
That's a very clean way to look at it, yeah. But the third pillar is where most legacy companies just fail spectacularly, and that is cognitive flexibility.
Okay, cognitive.
Yeah, this is the collective capacity of the leadership and the entire workforce to reframe problems, to challenge their own entrenched assumptions, and basically make sense of completely new paradigms.
So it's the mindset shift.
Yes.
It's the dispatchers at that logistics hub realizing they shouldn't be using trucks at all anymore. They need to be using cargo drones and adapting to that completely alien airspace without panicking.
It's distributed sense-making.
Yeah.
And the empirical evidence backing up these 3 pillars is overwhelming. There's a massive systematic review by Al-Zarani and colleagues in 2023 synthesizing dozens of recent studies.
Mm-hmm.
And they found that firms exhibiting high levels of this 3-pillared flexibility aren't just surviving, they are dominating. Another study by Zhang and Kwa in 2025 showed they launched breakthrough products over 30% faster than their rigid competitors.
Over 30%. I mean, in any competitive market, getting to market a third faster is an absolute kill shot.
It translates directly to market dominance. These flexible firms capture nearly double the market share.
Jeez.
And returning to our initial problem of the shrinking corporate lifespan longitudinal studies, tracking firms over a 5-year period show that highly flexible organizations have a significantly greater survival rate. It's often upward of 20% higher than industry averages during periods of disruption.
Okay, but let me push back on this, though.
Sure.
Because everything you're describing, constantly moving resources, shifting goals, rewriting the playbook, changing the business model, it sounds incredibly chaotic.
It can be.
Right? So doesn't a company eventually lose its core efficiency?
Yeah.
Because if you are endlessly pivoting to chase the new thing, it seems like you'd never develop the deep, highly optimized excellence that actually generates profit. You become a jack of all trades, but a master of none.
It is the most common critique of the agility model, and it's a completely valid concern if flexibility is executed poorly.
Right.
But recent rigorous analysis of this exact tension I'm thinking of, work by Agar and colleagues in 2021, it reveals a really fascinating counter-narrative.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, strategic flexibility is not the enemy of operational excellence. It is actually a prerequisite for it.
Wait, how can constantly changing be a prerequisite for being highly efficient?
Because of a mechanism called ambidextrous innovation.
Ambidextrous, like using both hands.
Exactly. Truly flexible organizations don't just abandon their core business every time the wind changes. They design dual structures.
Yeah.
So they become masters at balancing exploitative innovation, which is the hyper-efficient incremental improvement of their existing cash cows, with exploratory innovation, which is the messy, risk-taking pursuit of the next big paradigm shift.
So they basically wall off the exploration from the exploitation.
Exactly. Strategic flexibility isn't about applying chaos to your highly optimized supply chain. It's having the situational awareness to know when to apply extreme efficiency to a stable product and when to unleash messy creativity to find the next product.
So they don't lose efficiency.
Right. They just avoid the fatal mistake of applying world-class efficiency to a business model that is already dead.
That makes so much sense, but it brings up a massive logistical question for me.
Okay.
If strategic flexibility is essentially the brain of the organization deciding to pivot, deciding to be ambidextrous, what are the actual muscles that do the moving?
Right, right.
Because a CEO can stand on a stage at an all-hands meeting and declare we are now a strategically flexible, ambidextrous organization all day long.
Oh, yeah, we've all seen that.
Yeah, but speeches don't change how a 50,000-person machine operates.
No, they don't. And this is where Dr. Westover's research gets highly specific and honestly points to a hero that most people do not associate with cutting-edge strategy:
And what's that?
human resources.
Really? Because it's funny, when you think of organizational agility, you immediately think of tech stacks or R&D or product development.
Exactly.
You don't naturally think of the department that handles compliance training and benefits enrollment.
But that is exactly the paradigm shift. The data reveals that strategic intent relies entirely on a very specific aggressive configuration of HR, and it's referred to in organizational literature as high-performance work systems, or HPWS.
Okay, what does a high-performance work system actually look like? Because I feel like every HR department claims to be high-performing.
Oh, sure they do. But HQWS is a heavily researched construct. It's not a single policy. It is a tightly integrated cluster of HR practices designed to maximize human capital. So we are talking about incredibly rigorous, competency-based hiring that selects for adaptability over static skills. We are talking about massive, continuous investments in cross-functional training.
Not just a once-a-year seminar.
Right, right. And participative governance models where frontline employees actually have localized decision-making power. And compensation structures that aggressively reward value creation and adaptability rather than just tenure.
So it's basically the entire operating system of the workforce.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture quantitative studies trying to isolate the variables of corporate success, like a major 2021 study by Wang and colleagues, they found that these high-performance work systems account for roughly 65% of the total relationship between a firm's strategic flexibility and its ultimate financial performance.
Wait, 65%? That is wild.
Yeah, it means that more than half of a company's ability to successfully execute a pivot relies entirely on how they select, train, manage, and reward their people. The most brilliant strategic shift envisioned by board of directors is completely worthless if you don't have a workforce with the malleable skills, the psychological safety, and the behavioral incentives to actually execute it on a Tuesday morning. Strategy is just a hallucination without the people to carry it out.
Strategy is a hallucination. I love that.
Yeah.
And that makes the theoretical suddenly very real.
Yeah.
And the Westover paper brings up a brilliant case study of this in action, which is Siemens AG.
Yes.
So we're talking about a massive legacy German industrial conglomerate. Around 2018, they were facing extreme pressure from global digital transformation. The old way of building hardware just wasn't enough.
Okay.
Everything was becoming smart, connected, software-driven.
And their response wasn't just to go out and buy a bunch of tech startups. They looked inward. They realized their bottleneck wasn't technology, it was talent mobility. So they completely redesigned their internal HR architecture around this aggressive concept of lifelong learning.
Right. And they didn't just tell their mechanical engineers to go take a coding class.
Oh, no.
They built an AI-driven internal talent marketplace. So instead of an employee being locked into a rigid hierarchy within one specific business unit for a decade, this platform constantly matched their evolving skills with short-term projects and strategic needs across entirely different divisions of the company.
Yeah, they essentially created a fluid internal gig economy, but with the safety and resources of a massive corporation.
Which is huge.
And the friction involved in this cannot be understated. I mean, middle managers traditionally hate losing their best people to other departments.
Oh, absolutely. It's turf wars.
Exactly. It requires a massive cultural rewiring to incentivize leaders to actually share talent.
But the results speak for themselves, because the data shows that by 2023, Siemens saw a 40% increase in internal mobility. Their people weren't just staying in their silos. They were flowing like water to wherever the strategic brush fires were. And simultaneously, their employee engagement scores, specifically regarding the metric of having the opportunity to grow, they jumped by 22 points.
Which proves that when executed correctly, this kind of system isn't just good for the company's bottom line, it is deeply engaging for the workforce.
Right. But I want to linger on the reality of that internal mobility for a second.
Sure.
Because if I am constantly moving from a turbine project to a software integration team to a sustainability task force, don't I just become a glorified generalist?
That's a fair question.
For a highly technical engineering firm like Siemens, how do you maintain the incredibly deep world-class expertise required to build complex industrial machinery if everyone is constantly shuffling around?
It's the paradox of the generalist versus the specialist, and it is a critical balancing act.
Yeah.
But successful, flexible companies do not abandon deep expertise.
Okay.
What they do is they pair this rapid internal mobility with incredibly robust, continuous reskilling architectures. They are focused on cultivating what researchers term skill malleability and functional flexibility.
Skill malleability. So it's not replacing your core expertise, but bending it to fit new contexts.
Precisely. So you might be a deeply specialized materials scientist. The company still needs you to be a world-class materials scientist.
Right.
But their HPWS practices ensure you are also heavily trained in cross-functional collaboration design thinking or agile project management. They are building versatile talent pools.
So they speak more than one language, basically.
Exactly. So when a crisis hits that, materials scientist knows how to instantly integrate with a team of software developers and supply chain analysts to solve a completely novel problem. You have deep experts, but they speak the language of the entire business, not just their narrow technical silo.
That transition from a siloed expert to a collaborative, adaptable problem solver that requires more than just a new software platform, though.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't just mandate that kind of behavior. You have to change how people fundamentally think about their daily work.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because now we are crossing over from resource and coordination flexibility directly into cognitive flexibility. And cognitive flexibility is inextricably tied to organizational culture and, crucially, psychological safety.
And there's no better example of engineering cognitive flexibility than the case of DBS Bank in Singapore.
Yes, the DBS case is fascinating.
We are talking about a traditional, highly regulated, highly conservative financial institution. And leadership realized that to survive, they needed to transform the bank into, and this is a direct quote, a tech company with a banking license.
Which is a mind-bending paradigm shift for a banker.
Oh, completely.
Because the risk profile of a traditional banker is entirely about compliance, avoiding failure, and protecting assets. The risk profile of a tech company is about rapid iteration, breaking things, and failing fast to find innovation. Those two mindsets are violently opposed to each other.
Exactly. You can't just tell a 20-year compliance officer to move fast and break things.
No, you really can't.
So the CEO, Piyush Gupta, he introduced this cultural values framework called GAND-OF. Stands for grit, audacity, nimbleness, discipline, advocacy, learning, and fun.
Yeah, and acronyms aside, what matters is how they operationalized it. It wasn't just lip service. They invested massively in training the entire workforce in design thinking, and they instituted what they called innovation jams.
Okay, walk me through an innovation jam at a major bank.
Yeah.
'Cause that sounds like forced corporate fun.
I know it does, but it's actually highly strategic.
Okay.
An innovation jam pulls cross-functional teams, say a teller, a risk analyst, a software engineer, and a marketing director, away from their daily routines. They are given a specific emerging customer friction point, and they are tasked with rapidly prototyping a digital solution. But the key mechanism here is psychological safety.
Meaning they are allowed to build something terrible.
Meaning they are expected to build things that fail.
Wow.
Yeah, in a heavily regulated bank, creating an environment where it is explicitly safe to fail to test a bad idea and to learn from it without punishing the employee's career is revolutionary. That is how you build cognitive agility. You train the organizational muscle to view an unknown problem not as a threat to be mitigated, but as an opportunity to be designed around.
And the financial payoff for DBS was immense. By rewiring their culture to function like a tech company, their productivity, and this was measured as revenue per employee, it rose 35%.
That's massive.
They completely digitized their core offerings and ended up being named world's best bank by several major financial publications.
Amazing.
But changing mindsets and throwing innovation jams is great. Eventually, if you want people to take on the stress of constant adaptation, you have to talk about how they get paid.
You absolutely do, because if you step into the shoes of the employee, strategic flexibility looks a lot like localized risk.
It looks like chaos. I mean, my role is ambiguous.
Sure.
The skills I spent 10 years building might become obsolete tomorrow, and my entire department might get dissolved and restructured next quarter.
Right.
That is a massive cognitive load to carry.
Precisely. The organization is offloading a significant portion of its environmental uncertainty directly onto the shoulders of the workforce. And if your compensation strategy doesn't acknowledge and heavily mitigate that risk, the psychological contract breaks and the system collapses.
So you have to pay for the flexibility.
Yeah, researchers like Carnellison and colleagues who study these high-performance work systems, they consistently point out that performance-aligned reward systems, specifically leading market compensation combined with aggressive performance contingent pay, are absolutely non-negotiable.
Because if you want me to act like a startup founder, you have to pay me like one when we win.
Exactly. It compensates for the stress, but more importantly, it creates a powerful sorting effect within the talent pool.
Let's dive into that sorting effect because the
Yeah.
case study provided in the research is just wild.
The hair group.
Yes, it's the Hair Group, the world's largest appliance manufacturer based in China.
Hmm.
They implemented a structural and compensation model called Rendanhai.
Yes, and it is widely considered one of the most extreme, radical, and ultimately successful implementations of organizational flexibility in modern history.
So under this model, they essentially obliterated middle management.
Yep.
They took tens of thousands of employees and broke the company down so that every single employee essentially operates as a micro-enterprise.
Walk us through how that actually functions on the factory floor, because it's hard to visualize.
Right. So instead of a traditional structure where an R&D department designs a refrigerator and then hands it to manufacturing who built it and then hands it to sales who tries to push it on customers.
The classic pipeline, yeah.
Hair forms rapid autonomous teams. So let's say a group of 5 employees realizes there's a huge unmet need for a very specific type of mini fridge for college dorms that also stores cosmetics.
Okay.
They don't have to push this up a chain of command. They form a micro enterprise.
Yeah.
They pitch it, they secure internal funding, they build it, they market it, and crucially, they manage their own profit and loss.
They are entirely directly exposed to the market.
Yes, and they capture a direct share of the profits they generate. But I have to stop here and push back on this heavily.
Go for it.
Because on paper, that sounds incredibly innovative.
Mm.
But in reality, that sounds like Lord of the Flies inside a corporation.
It does sound intense.
If I'm an employee, I want a stable salary, health benefits, and a weekend. I don't want to have to hustle and fight for my survival like a gig economy worker or a desperate startup founder every single day just to keep the lights on. Doesn't this completely destroy job security and create a toxic, cutthroat environment?
It is a profound shift in the risk-reward paradigm, and it is undeniably terrifying for a certain profile of worker. You are absolutely right that it destroys traditional job security.
Right.
But this is exactly where that sorting effect mechanism comes into play. Decades of economic and psychological research into performance pay reveals that these systems do not just incentivize behavior, they act as a massive filter for talent.
So it intentionally drives away the people who want stability.
In a sense, yes. It naturally repels talent with high-risk aversion, the people who frankly just want to punch a clock and execute a predictable routine.
Which is fine for some businesses, but not this one.
Exactly. But simultaneously, it acts as a magnet for a very specific archetype, highly versatile entrepreneurial talent with lower risk aversion who actively chafe under traditional bureaucracy.
Sure, it weeds out the clock punchers, but even for the entrepreneurial types, doesn't that constant internal competition cause extreme burnout? I mean, how does a company maintain loyalty if everyone is just fighting for their own microenterprise's survival?
It's a very real friction point, and Hare has had to constantly refine the model to ensure microenterprises collaborate rather than cannibalize each other. They use internal contracting systems where microenterprises buy services from one another, creating an internal ecosystem of mutual dependence.
Oh, so they're trading with each other.
Right, exactly. But to answer your question about loyalty and burnout, the retention mechanism is the sheer upside. For the people who thrive in this environment, they are rewarded handsomely for value creation. They aren't waiting for a 3% annual cost of living raise. If they spot a niche and exploit it, they share directly in the wealth.
And the macro results are impossible to argue with. Because by unleashing this hyper-flexible, internally competitive swarm of microenterprises, Hare managed to grow its revenue by an average of 8% annually for over a decade, in a global appliance industry that was otherwise completely stagnant.
So we have the strategic intent. We have the internal HR mechanisms like AI-driven mobility and robust reskilling. We have the culture of psychological safety and the aggressive compensation models to reward the risk. But none of this happens spontaneously.
Right.
There was a catalyst required to initiate and sustain this entire ecosystem.
The leadership profile.
Yeah.
Because the research indicates that you cannot run a highly flexible, high-performance work system with a traditional corporate leader.
Absolutely. The data reveals a very specific demographic and behavioral profile of leadership that makes flexibility actually function. And this brings us to a really foundational, highly empirical piece of research by Zhu and colleagues in 2017. They studied over 100 firms in China, trying to isolate exactly what makes this flexibility translate into financial performance. And they found a surprising, statistically significant demographic link.
Yeah, they found that female CEOs fundamentally amplify the relationship between strategic flexibility and organizational performance.
Yes. This study provided hard empirical evidence that the positive effects of these innovative HR practices on firm productivity were most pronounced under female leadership.
Okay, let's dive into the why of that, because obviously it's not magic, it's about behavioral tendencies.
Correct.
I look at it this way. Think about the archetypal mid-20th century corporate leader. It is inherently command and control.
Very much so.
It's like a ship captain in a hurricane. They stand at the helm, they have all the information, they shout orders down to the deck, and they expect instant, unquestioning obedience. Turn the wheel, batten the hatches.
A highly directive, top-down authoritarian style, which, by the way, works incredibly well for operational execution in a predictable environment.
Right when you just need to get the thing done. But inclusive leadership, which is the mechanism we are really talking about here, is fundamentally different. It's much more like a jazz band leader.
Oh, I like that.
You aren't standing there with a rigid sheet of music dictating every single note to the bassist and the drummer. You are actively listening to the other musicians. You are reading the room in real time. You are intentionally stepping back to make space for someone else to take a solo when they find a groove, and you are finding the rhythm together adaptively.
That is a phenomenal analogy because it perfectly illustrates the mechanism of adaptability. And when organizational psychologists conduct massive meta-analyses of leadership styles across thousands of leaders, a consistent pattern emerges. The data aggregated by researchers like Eagly in 2003 and Postje and Underdahl in 2014 shows that female leaders, on average, are statistically more likely to exhibit participative, relational, and transformational leadership styles.
So they are naturally inclined to act like the jazz band leader.
Based on the aggregate data, yes. They are more likely to distribute decision rights down the hierarchy, actively solicit diverse and dissenting perspectives, and consciously cultivate the psychological safety we talked about earlier.
Right.
And if we look back at everything required for strategic flexibility, the cross-functional team's rapid sense-making, failing, fast, continuous learning well, psychological safety and empowerment are the absolute non-negotiable prerequisites.
Because if a team of engineers is terrified that the command and control ship captain CEO will fire them for making a mistake, they will never experiment.
No, they'll just hide it.
Yeah, they will hide their failures, they will stick to the safe, obsolete playbook, and your strategic flexibility completely dies on the vine.
Exactly. The relational leadership style is the unlock code for the high-performance work system.
Which perfectly sets up the Accenture case study from the research, because it shows how a massive firm deliberately hardwired this exact style of inclusive leadership into their corporate DNA.
A brilliant example from the professional services sector.
So in 2019, Julie Sweet takes over as CEO of Accenture. She is steering a colossal ship. I mean, over 700,000 employees globally.
Huge.
And she immediately sets these incredibly aggressive public goals for diversity and inclusion. By 2025, the mandate was to achieve a 50% female workforce and 25% female managing directors globally.
But the critical takeaway for our discussion isn't just the demographic targets, because simply hitting a quota doesn't fundamentally change the operational capability of a 700,000-person firm.
Exactly. What they did was take the abstract concept of inclusion and forge it into the company's operational mechanics through something they called the Leadership Essentials Framework.
They codified the behavior, they made inclusive actions like actively seeking out dissenting views, building psychological safety, and empowering decentralized teams to make decisions a mandatory measured competency for all leaders.
They actually tied executive performance evaluations and compensation directly to engagement and inclusion metrics. It was no longer just, did you hit your quarterly revenue targets? It was, did you build an environment where your team feels safe enough to adapt, share knowledge, and solve complex problems? If you hit your numbers, but your team's engagement score was terrible, you failed as a leader.
And the outcomes validate the approach. Over the next 4 years, Accenture saw a 12-point rise in employee engagement. But strategically, this deeply embedded inclusive culture acted as a massive accelerant.
How so?
It allowed them to rapidly pivot their colossal workforce to focus on huge high-demand areas like global digital transformation and corporate sustainability solutions. The inclusive culture broke down silos and accelerated the massive knowledge sharing required to execute that pivot.
Wow. So if we pull all the way back, we've talked about the systems, the culture, the compensation, and the leadership. What does this all fundamentally mean for the relationship between a human being and the company they work
It
for?
changes everything.
Right, because it feels like the old social contract of work has been completely torn up. If I'm an employee in 1985, the deal was clear. I give you my loyalty, I keep my head down, and I give you unquestioning obedience. In exchange, you give me a clear ladder to climb employment security and a guaranteed pension when I'm 65.
That was the traditional psychological contract, but as organizational researchers like Rousseau pointed out back in 1995, that contract is completely fundamentally incompatible with an era of strategic flexibility.
It doesn't work.
No, the old corporate ladder, the idea of a linear, predictable ascent within one stable silo, is essentially dead in these agile organizations.
Okay, so if the old deal is dead, what exactly is the new deal? What am I trading my labor for?
The new psychological contract represents a profound shift from the promise of employment security to the promise of employability.
Employability. Break that down for me. What does that mean for a 45-year-old middle manager who just wants to know they can pay their mortgage next year?
It means the organization is being radically honest. They are no longer saying, we guarantee you will have this specific job title for the next 20 years, because they simply cannot predict if that job will exist in 5 years.
Right.
Instead, they are saying, if you give us your flexibility and your best effort, we will act as a platform for your continuous growth. We will invest so heavily in your upskilling, your cross-functional experiences, and your adaptability that whether you stay here, move to a completely different industry, or leave to start your own company, you will remain highly valuable and highly employable in the broader marketplace.
So they are replacing the promise of a safe harbor with the promise of a better boat.
That is a great way to put it, yeah.
A great example of this platform for growth concept in action is Unilever.
Yes, Unilever.
Around 2019, they realized traditional top-down corporate training was too slow. So they launched an AI-driven platform called Flex Experiences.
Which is essentially an internal talent marketplace similar to what we discussed with Siemens.
Yes, but applied on a massive global scale. It connects employees across the world to curated learning pathways, mentorships, and fractional short-term project opportunities in entirely different departments.
Right.
And the engagement was incredible. They saw a 30% increase in internal mobility. But the brilliant part is how they explicitly tied this personal employability to the company's strategic pivots.
How did they do that?
For example, when Unilever decided that environmental sustainability was going to be a massive strategic focus, the AI platform immediately started surfacing learning modules and project opportunities related to the circular economy and decarbonization to employees all over the world.
It is the perfect alignment. The organization gets the rapid upskilling it needs to execute its new strategy, and the individual employee gets cutting-edge experience that drastically increases their own market value. It is a mutually beneficial trade.
Okay, I have to play the cynic here for a moment.
Please do.
Because employability sounds great in a corporate brochure, but isn't this just a highly convenient, PR-friendly excuse for corporations to completely abandon job security?
Some people definitely see it that way.
Right. Isn't it just a way to say, hey, sorry, we're eliminating your entire division to please Wall Street, but hey, look at all these great agile project management skills you learned on our internal platform. How do companies prevent their workforce from feeling utterly disposable and cynical in a system where the ground is constantly shifting?
It is the absolute Achilles heel of the flexible organization. If the workforce perceives that this flexibility is a one-way street, that they bear all the risk and the stress of adapting, while the shareholders reap all the financial rewards, their commitment will completely and instantly erode.
Yeah, they'll just quit or stop caring.
Exactly. The research is highly explicit on this point, and Villablanca and colleagues noted this in 2011. Trust is the defining variable that determines whether a flexible system thrives or cannibalizes itself.
So how do you actually build and maintain that trust when you can't promise anyone that their job will exist next year?
The most successful organizations do 3 very specific structural things to signal good faith and maintain this new psychological contract. First, they provide what researchers call investment visibility.
Meaning they show their math.
Exactly. They don't just demand flexibility, they transparently demonstrate the massive amounts of capital and time they're pouring into the employee's continuous development. The employee needs to literally see the investment being made in them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, they build career architecture.
Explain that, because if the ladder is dead, what is the architecture?
It's a lattice rather than a ladder.
A lattice, okay.
Right. The company maps out and clearly communicates that there are multiple viable, celebrated pathways for success and status within the firm. It is no longer just up the management chain or out the door. It is lateral moves, cross-functional rotations, and expanding your portfolio of experiences. Flexibility has to feel expansive. It has to feel like an opportunity for mastery rather than a precarious scramble to stay relevant.
And the third thing?
They provide actual tangible safety nets.
This is the crux of it.
Yes. If an organization is demanding that its employees embrace the deep discomfort and risk of constant adaptation, the organization has to empirically prove it will catch them if they fall.
So what does that look like?
This means highly robust severance architectures, extensive outplacement services, and in many advanced companies, allowing laid-off employees to retain access to internal learning platforms and alumni networks long after their specific role was eliminated. You have to prove that even in separation, the company respects the flexibility the employee provided.
Wow. This has been an incredibly dense, fascinating journey through the literal mechanics of the modern business world. We started with the terrifying reality that massive companies are dying faster than ever before in history, and we've mapped out exactly how the survivors are engineering their way out of obsolescence.
It's a lot to take in, but if we synthesize the core message from Dr. Westover's research, it is this strategic flexibility is not an accident. It is not an innate personality trait of a cool tech company, and it is certainly not a buzzword. It is a highly deliberate, difficult structural choice. Organizations only survive if they operationalize this flexibility through high-performance work systems, relentlessly designed practices around hiring for adaptability, continuous reskilling, and aggressive compensation.
Right.
But those mechanical systems are ultimately useless unless they are driven by inclusive relational leadership that fosters deep psychological safety. And the entire machine is only sustained by rewriting that fundamental unspoken psychological contract, with the workforce shifting the paradigm from static employment security to dynamic mutual growth and employability.
And for the listener today, whether you are running a massive global division, managing a small local team, or just trying to navigate your own individual career path, the takeaway is undeniable. The era of static, siloed expertise is over.
Completely over.
Treating your own skills as highly malleable, actively seeking out cross-functional friction, and fiercely embracing cognitive flexibility, the ability to not just learn, but to willingly unlearn what you know and reframe your reality. That is the only viable way to thrive in an economic landscape that is constantly shifting underneath our feet.
It is truly the ultimate survival skill for the 21st century.
Yeah.
But looking at the logical extreme of all this research, synthesizing everything we've unpacked today about constant, relentless adaptation, it raises a deeply important, almost philosophical question.
What's that?
If we actually succeed in building these ultimate hyper-flexible organizations, companies that are completely fluid, perpetually dissolving and reforming teams, radically pivoting their strategic goals every few quarters, and constantly retraining their staff for whatever paradigm comes next, what happens to deep generational institutional memory?
Oh, wow.
Right? In our frantic existential race to become completely adaptable to the future, is there a hidden systemic danger that we are designing organizations with absolutely no memory of their own past?
That's a scary thought.
If nobody has been in the same role for more than 18 months who remembers why the foundational systems were built the way they were, the mechanisms we discussed today make companies incredibly agile, but we have to leave wondering in the end, is it possible for an organization to be too flexible?